All right, why don't we officially launch at 7:15, and we're going to jump into session 4. We talked a lot last week about rich learning experiences, knowledge development. One of the topics that came out last week clearly was this tug of war that I think educators feel between the tests, assessments, mostly the state tests that are for accountability. But we know there are lots of assessments being done within your school districts that are to some degree accountable to the district. So that conversation came up as we were pushing for more authentic, rigorous learning, inquiry-based learning, project-based, the idea that it's hard to do that when you're really using a pacing guide and you are preparing for a test. Those two things don't always work together. It's not a new topic or a new concept at all, but because of COVID and because of what some people call learning loss, others are saying it's unfinished learning. What we know as educators is that our students are lagging behind a bit because of the interruptions. But they have learned a tremendous amount during COVID-19. Academically, though, we know we have some things to make up or catch up. So for tonight, our main objectives is to advance that conversation and really use it, buttress the conversation with the science around brain development, particularly as it relates to advanced cognition or cognitive skills, and where the adolescent brain is in being able to really lean into more higher order thinking and develop those cognitive muscles, if you will, of the brain. For you, we have this resource. It is a huge resource, I think 360 something pages long, where the 5 what we call principles of science of learning and development, and to some degree we also call these the non-negotiables of whole child learning. If we really want to address the learning and development holistically and provide for all of the needs of young people, these things are non-negotiable. Not just in your classroom, of course, we mean school-wide, we mean community-wide overall. But what we know, again, in order for us to have a more transformative education system where students are empowered to learn, where they're able to personalize their learning with our help, where we can culturally affirm who they are. These 5 principles need to be in place, not in a once in a while way, but in a very rigorous, ongoing, sustainable way. And that's how we get our students to learn, to thrive. And to be honest, that's how we get them to pass the test too. We want to transform education from what and to what. And of course, we've been laying the case about why for a long time. Why? Because so many of our young people, no matter how hard you as educators have been working, and you do, and no matter how many tools are at your disposal, the system itself is not always geared towards supporting young people enough so that they can come to your classrooms, learn the things you're trying to teach them, and succeed academically and beyond. This idea that students are either motivated or not. Well, actually, the opposite of that is that students are motivated, and they'll always be motivated when our tasks are engaging, when it's meaningful to them, when they can apply it, when they have the support to learn, when they have the conditions around them. So there's no, some students are motivated and some are not. Actually, no. They're all motivated, and they all can be motivated and should be supported to be motivated.
We talked a little bit in my group about 2 things. One, the challenges of homework in an environment where students don't have access to the basic materials they need to access the curriculum. Also, how schools are not necessarily fully equipped from a staff perspective and from a staffing allocation perspective to address the various kinds of challenges that students are coming into. And that's everything from students being on a medication regimen, but parents losing insurance, so they lose access to the medication, what kind of impacts that has in school, to again, lack of power or food or shelter at home, and how you need staffing to be able to meet students where they are. And
Yeah.
students are in a lot more places in that regard than they were even 10 to 20 years ago.
Here, talk a bit of, what we'll do each time is infuse a little around the brain science. We call it the science of learning and development because it's beyond neuroscience. It's neuroscience, but it's also psychology, cognitive science, all of it. It's a multidisciplinary approach. This slide, though, really is just a way of presenting a little of the science. And I want to focusing on the prefrontal cortex and the importance of this developmental period and the prefrontal cortex and the work we do. But within the adolescent period, it's figuring out what's more meaningful to learn, and it is weeding out what's not as important. That's how we got the use it or lose it principle. You use it and you strengthen it. You don't use it, you lose it. So if you, for example, were in a bilingual school, let's say you're English speaker and you were learning Spanish and you got moved to an English only, then eventually you lose everything that you learned in Spanish in that school that you moved from. We do know that. The prefrontal cortex, though, is a really important conversation to have during adolescence. And what we know, especially in early adolescence, is that this part of the brain, the frontal lobe, if you will, it's really beginning to stretch. It's beginning to develop the ability to engage in those more adult-like conversations, adult-like learning. It's beginning to reason out things more, which means as the brain is reasoning, that means it's questioning things. It does have the ability to be attentive to things for longer periods, especially things that are meaningful and interesting. So one of the things we know about this span of time, the adolescent period, is that we really have to capture the developing prefrontal cortex. It is the time that for some students, if they are behind academically, and we feel the need to, if you will, dumb down the learning so that we are not really engaging them in authentic learning, in inquiry-based instruction. We're not giving them long-term projects. They don't get to join the robotics club, for example, or the debate team. Those students actually are not having an opportunity to grow their prefrontal cortex, which is so important in adulthood. As adults, we have to think and reason and problem solve for ourselves all the time. And so the adolescent period, again, is a time when the body and brain is preparing to take on those tasks. Mary Helen Imardina Young really spends a lot of time thinking about adolescence. She is, of course, the director of Candle, which is located at University of Southern California. Just want you to wrap up some of the discussions we're having tonight. It's through listening to her.
Let me just start by saying, what I mean is that what you're having emotion about, you're thinking about, right? And what you're thinking about, you have the possibility of learning about, depending on how you then proceed, right? As we just heard from Professor Bork. So what this means is that the entry into learning comes from a need to know. It comes from a student's curiosity, from their sort of attempting to pull into their worldview, the story they're telling themselves about how things work, information that's going to help them to understand and predict the world around them. What I want to really highlight for just an instant is what we're finding in the lab is that when we interview young people, and young people like you might have been when you were 14, 15, 16 years old, right? And then we follow those kids over time with brain imaging, with psychophysiological recording how their bodies react when they're engaging in complex learning tasks and thinking about meaning they've made out of things they've witnessed in the world. And then we follow them into young adulthood. What we discover is that young people's what we call dispositions of mind, irrespective of IQ, irrespective of their ethnic background, irrespective of their parents' level of education, irrespective of the socioeconomic resources available to their family. When kids show us that they are curious about understanding things deeply, that they follow up on ideas and are willing to do what we call transcendent meaning making. So they take facts, they put them together, but then they think, well, why do I need to know that? Why does that matter? How do I feel about this? How does this help me understand something in the world that I may have witnessed or something that I do or could do in the world? When kids show us that their disposition is to engage in that way, the more they do that, we can predict that they're going to grow their brains differently over the next 2 years when we bring them back to the lab again. The starting point is 2 years later, within the same kid, we can predict the kind of network activity growth in all the networks that are involved in the most important kinds of learning.
But her message is still really simple. Is there a reaction from anyone on that video?
I guess I wonder if children, to some extent, we just tell children, hey, you should do this. You should go to school. But I wonder, as I think more about it, it makes me think that maybe I need to do a better job of giving reasons to individuals as to why they should, to when it comes down to schooling, why should they do that? Tying, like the young lady mentioned before, tying the education, the importance of education back to quality of life.
Yes.
At some point in the future, maybe 15 years in the future, 20 years in the future. But, and that, that's something that I hadn't thought about it from that angle before. I mean, I've done that, but it seems that I could have done a better job as I listened to her speak. I could have come up with more things to share as to why it may motivate them to do better, to engage.
Yeah.
That was one of my points that I like when she said, set them up for greatness and give them a reason to learn. I don't think that we go in with that mindset of giving the children a reason to learn. If we go in with that mindset of giving them a reason to learn what they could relate it to, how it can relate to them, then we might get better outcomes from them. So I feel the same way that Mr. Charles feels about that, but about putting more emphasis on the reason we are teaching this, or the reason we want you to learn this, the reason you need to know this, how you can use this, instead of just saying, we need you to pass a test.
Learning matters. Learning is personal. You're able to go on the journey, really understanding yourself and how to use the learning and the environment to navigate the space for yourself. Awesome. Very difficult sometimes for students to manage throughout the day, coming from a math class, then the science class, then there's a field trip. School offers the best opportunity, really, to help students to navigate what the real world is about. And we have the opportunity to help overall learning. Tonight, we're focusing a little bit more on academics. It has to be relevant. A lot of what Mary Helen was talking about is the relevance, the meaning making for our young people. So once we get ourselves in that mindset and we recognize that we are actually the professionals charged with the brain and how the brain develops and how the brain has the capacity to manage the many issues in life, we are charged primarily with that as educators. So we do have to understand the connection between what we do, the brain development, and its ability to learn. We want to put accelerated learning and equity in the same basket, because it is truly a way to provide equitable learning and support structures in place for our young people. I want to center this concept in equity, that if we truly about helping all and each of our young people or students to learn, to grow, to develop confidence, to understand themselves as learners, to be excited about learning, to be motivated, then accelerated learning is an approach we want to lean into. Kind of think about where we've been so far. It's only your third night, and I really appreciate you engaging. You're such deep thinkers. You're so conscientious. I can tell just from the questions and the points you put on the table. I love working with teachers. I love being a teacher, and I love working with teachers. The last session, Guy and I are going to be quiet, actually, and we're going to have you do the speaking. We're going to ask everyone to come prepared on the final session with a presentation for the group. One or two key takeaways from the work we're doing together, these sessions, and I want you to package it together in a way that you can share with the rest of the group on the last night. So I'll stop right there just to see if there are any final thoughts from anyone, any questions, and then we'll say goodnight.
I just wanted to say this about the accelerated learning. If you, like with my students, I'll say words like iteration. I'm a special ed teacher, and whatever I say, some people may think, oh, they don't understand that. They do. If they don't understand it, I'll explain it to them, or they get it. Or maybe you're in a class and you might, even as a whole class instruction in a general education class, you may try to, you go ahead and target it at the higher level, but the other kids, they really will understand.
Yeah.
The students will understand more than you think they will.
Absolutely. And the brain says it. Everything we know about the brain is designed to learn. That is awesome. I couldn't ask for a better closing.